is the former Attorney General from Oklahoma, our would-be Secretary of the EPA. I will remind people it's called the Environmental Protection Agency. There is absolutely nothing on his agenda to protect the environment. His agenda is fully and I think unabashedly, I mean, I don't think he runs from this, to roll back and protect the corporations, the fossil fuel producers that are in any way inhibited by the EPA. I mean, I don't even think that's his, I don't even think he attempts to hide that. Meantime, almost while he was going through his hearing, Tom Price was getting, in my mind, just devastated by Senator Al Franken, among others, in his hearing. And not simply, and look, you know, we had talked about this on the Majority Report. The Trump administration, or I should say transition team, has supposedly kept him at arm's length, Tom Price, in the development of their replace plan for Obamacare. And I'm using air quotes because it's a joke. They don't have one. That's what makes it much easier to keep Tom Price away from it. Tom Price, of course, has his own plan. He didn't want to go into this hearing flaunting it, as it were. And, of course, there was very few questions allowed, and there was very little time. I think 7 minutes per senator was all that was granted in this hearing. And the senators were a little bit distracted by the enormous amount of corruption that Tom Price seems to have participated in.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Price has basically consistently sort of, traded essentially in his own kind of private stock portfolio based off of votes he's taking. So he's basically, taking a vote in Congress to benefit a company that he knows he will personally profit from. And that was their main focus in the hearing before they even got to his plan, which would take away coverage for people, not deal with pre-existing conditions, and also, maybe we get to it a bit later, in some ways completely contradicts what Trump says he wants to do about health care. It would almost be the equivalent, like if Trump personally said, my top priority is dealing with the climate crisis, and he nominated Pruitt. That's like a little bit of the dynamic going on with the Price nomination. But it seemed to me that the only response, it was kind of in some ways reminded me of the Jeff Sessions hearing when people called Jeff Sessions out on his abominable record on civil and voting rights, which is that the response was always, how can you attack his personal integrity? There was never an explanation of like, well, why did you trade on behalf of this company and profit off of it a week after that vote? It was all just, well, don't hit my integrity.
What was really interesting is that in terms of this question of Tom Price and his the stock stuff, is that Price said that he decided to buy stock in an Australian biotech firm after receiving information from Representative Chris Collins, who is a board member of that company. He claimed in the hearing that he was just talking to Collins about the stock, and incidentally, folks, that's called insider trading. Right. You're not supposed to get that type of information.
Right.
Price claims he just was talking broadly about the company with Collins, and then went on to do his own research, and then purchase it. And
as part of this broad conversation, what websites would you recommend I go on?
But on top of that, this contradicted a fact sheet that the transition team put out, which said that Dr. Price's Morgan Stanley financial advisor designed his portfolio and directed all the trades in the account. So at first their story was like, oh, I didn't know about it. Then when it became clear that Price had talked to Collins about it, he said, well, he didn't tell me to buy the stock. He just told me about the company, Zimmer Biomet. And then I looked it up online, or I did all sorts of different research, and then I bought it because I thought, hey, this is a company that I could, in a week, make a vote to help this company out. Now, of course, he didn't say that second part, but that's what he did.
That's quite literally what happened. I mean, it was also the approach that he used just in the sort of general's question that Senator Franken asked him about owning money in tobacco industry, which is, hey, I have people who do this for me, and I'm sure you do, Senator, and I have no idea.
Now, ethics experts say the Price could be subject to the 2012 Stock Act, which it bans insider trading by members of Congress. And if he received non-public information from Collins or others prior to purchasing the stock, he could be in trouble. But that remains to be seen. One thing that stood out over the course of this was the real, and let's move to policy here, beyond his corruption. We started to see the outlines of how they're going to try and lie to the American public. And the problem with this is that, particularly when they're sitting there with people who actually know what they're talking about, the problem is, and we just have a minute here, is that when they start talking about things like risk pools and whatnot, it sounds like mumbo jumbo to, I think, average American citizens. But there was one exchange where Rand Paul was talking about how it's really important to drive down the cost of insurance, to have risk pools. So if I have 4 people, that's not as good as having 100,000 people. And if I have 100,000 people, that's not as good about having a risk pool full of 1 million people, because that means that some people, the number of sick people will be paid for by the non-sick people, essentially. And during the middle of that exchange, or at the end of it, Al Franken, when it was his turn to speak, said, you know what the best risk pool would be? Would be Medicare for all. And Tom Price had a small smile on his face, realizing that, we should never go down this road again, talking about the efficacy of risk pools.
And by the way, that is the difference between Rand Paul and Tom Price. I am quite sure that Rand Paul did not understand what had just happened. Tom Price saw that they gave away the store.
Yes, that was a classic libertarian moment. For every debate I've had with a libertarian, it sounded exactly like that, where he says, 100,000 risk pool is better than 1 million risk pool. Or he says, it's not as good as 1 million. Million is better than 100,000. Well, how about 100 million, 200 million? Well,
then we're Cuba.